I'm Angelo Moratti. This is 10 Minutes to Inspire. Samantha Power, welcome to Take Emotion, welcome to Milano, and most of all, welcome to 10 Minutes to Inspire. You have had an incredible journey during your life. You started as a journalist. Actually, my mother has been a journalist, so I can understand your challenges and your struggles to become a great journalist. And then you followed on writing books. I guess that was probably the trigger for everything else that followed. Is this true or not?
I think so. I would say growing up in America, having immigrated from Ireland, there wouldn't have been much of an indication early on that I was heading to become a writer or that I would end up in human rights or in government. I wasn't very political. I wasn't following foreign policy, but I loved sports. And when I got to college, in addition to playing competitive sports, I had a sports radio talk show. I was a sports reporter for the local newspaper. And it brought me one summer down to Atlanta, my first summer of college, to a role where my ambition was to be a sportscaster and to get to spend my life just watching games. Like, what could be wrong with that? I mean, I wasn't thinking about the state of the world or anything like that. But while I was in that role and doing something for that role, I was sitting taking notes on an Atlanta Braves baseball game, and the footage came in from Tiananmen Square at just the moment that the Chinese government had turned its tanks on young people exactly my age who were standing up for nothing more than the ability to gather and to speak freely. And I was really shaken by that. So at that moment, I kind of thought, wow, that's weird. I feel really connected to these kids. I feel really, they're in China. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. Like, what? And so it was more a mirror to my own evolving sensibility, or maybe a set of values that weren't very salient to me inside of me, but they were triggered by this episode. And because I had been a sports journalist and gotten decent at writing quickly and on deadline and knowing how to bridge the gap between my audience who may not have cared about my college volleyball team and my writing about that team, I sort of took the same toolkit and applied it as a freelance journalist in Bosnia once the war broke out there. This was after I graduated from college. But I was lucky in the sense that I had experience as an amateur sports journalist. And while the subjects were very, very different, that toolkit could travel in a sense. And it came with me, and I wrote on deadline and was able to string sentences and stories together and bridge those gaps between my readers in America and then the former Yugoslavia where these horrific things were happening. So I know it sounds like a big leap, but it if you have the confidence around how you can do something, then maybe when the what changes, you at least have something to bring to the effort.
So there are moments in life that define you and change you. When you won the Pulitzer Prize, first of all, did you expect it? And what effect did it have on your life?
It had a big effect. There's no question. The approach I was taking to American foreign policy as a writer, as a professor already by then, as a public intellectual, if that's the right phrase, was very much an approach that made an appeal to anybody who was listening to me to better integrate consideration of human consequences. That's a fancy way of saying I was asking for human rights and human welfare to be better injected into foreign policy deliberations. And so I was a critic, bottom line. But I was a critic very much from a moral, humanitarian, human rights perspective. That is hard in national security circles, especially as a woman, at that time a young woman, no longer a young woman, but at that time breaking in. So I had a lot, there would have been a lot of barriers to my ideas being taken seriously. The Pulitzer, boom, validation, legitimation. Oh, she's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, not just she's a Pulitzer Prize winning foreign policy critic. So it was incredibly, just even to this day, I feel so lucky. And even the book itself that I had written, which was on American responses to the major genocides of the 20th century, this is not a book that many people were going to read. It may have been, I hope it was very good. It certainly got all those awards. And so people who read it liked it, but not many people read it. But suddenly it had that gold sticker of Pulitzer Prize, and then it went viral. It became a book that you almost had to read to be in polite, company, certainly in foreign policy circles. And so it's actually quite linear to your question insofar as post-Pulitzer, Barack Obama read my book. Had I not won the Pulitzer, would Barack Obama, would that book have crossed his desk? Would he have, who knows? He's a pretty curious guy and definitely read an awful lot, but that it brought that book and those ideas into mainstream circles. And when he read the book and became exposed to the ideas, that's when he reached out to me and asked me to be a part of his then Senate foreign policy team, helping him think through what, in the face of the US invasion of Iraq and the introduction of torture again into the American toolkit, what was the right response for a first-term senator? And then, of course, not long after that, he decided to run for president. So the task became much bigger. How should he formulate a principled, smart, but also tough foreign policy agenda that would distinguish itself from, yes, President George W. Bush, but also from other Democratic candidates. So without that book, winning the Pulitzer, finding its way to him, I think it's extremely unlikely I would have ended up on the course that I did.
So it seems to me that you're a fighter, but you're a fighter who fights for other people, and you're a fighter who fights against injustices. Now, this is a mission, a life's mission, and it's very hard because when you dedicate your life to other people, the problems are 10 times as much, and only the people who are in it understand that. How do you cope, and how can you continue to pursue your mission and at the same time have a normal life?
I think people do go through the world with different dispositions. And I think my disposition, maybe because I'm an immigrant, maybe because I had a mother who was very much this way, but my disposition was always, I'm so lucky. I just felt always, even the story I've just told you about serendipity and how things happened, and I've always felt like the lucky one, kind of. And that's a great perspective to have if, for example, in the early part of my career, I'm in war zones documenting atrocities, because my disposition was not, oh, woe is me, it's so hard being me here writing about the experiences of these people. My disposition was, these people are who, there but for the grace of God go I. They're just like me. We have the same taste in music. We have the same sensibilities, the same values in so many ways. This was in Bosnia. And yet they are being afflicted in these ways. They are living under siege in Sarajevo. Yes, I'm living with them to tell their story, but I can get on an airplane anytime and leave. And so too, when I was in government running USAID, we responded to all the major humanitarian catastrophes of the last, half decade before President Trump dismantled USAID. But it was that same thing of, I get to help. How lucky am I? How many people out there, when they open up the newspaper, they see something on TV and it breaks their heart. The reason that they often change the channel to go to the sports is because they feel there's nothing they can do. There's always something I can do. I'm so lucky. And especially at USAID, to work with these teams of people who are experts. You see climate change and extreme weather events, flooding, farmland, and all the losses and livestock dying, and herders in Somalia and Ethiopia committing suicide because their livestock were gone and they had no way to feed their families anymore. And that sense of humiliation and devastation was so great. I mean, it was so. If I'd read about that in the newspaper, I'd be tempted to go to the sports section. But here I am at USAID, and I summon the experts on how to do crop recovery in the wake of flooding, or someplace else in Africa where the issue is drought, as it was in Ethiopia and Somalia. What is our drought-resistant seed? How can we scale it? Is it well-tailored to this geography? Just the problem-solving mindset, and to be surrounded by these sort of unfailingly constructive individuals I just felt I'm so lucky I get to do something. And part of, I feel, our mission in this time of that's pretty bleak in many respects is how do we make more people feel like they have some small amount of power, because a lot of people care, but they feel that there's nothing they can do and it breaks their heart. And so they turn away. But if you can make people feel like there's something that they can be a part of where they can make even some small difference, that is the gift that keeps on giving. Once you have felt yourself make a difference, there's nothing, that feels better than that. But it's that first step that, hooking people in that way. And right now, the sense of disempowerment in the face of AI, in the face of climate change, is pretty strong in young people. And getting them to learn to kind of shrink the change, to think about what's the small thing that can be done that won't solve the whole problem, but that might ameliorate something or mitigate something for someone. That's been my mindset, and that's the one I think that we need somehow to spread that gospel.
So you dedicate your life to extreme human catastrophes, war zone, genocides. So you have to have a high spirit to confront those themes and issues. When everything gets taken away from you, because you were in the middle of your mission, and then all of a sudden, a bunch of people come and say, no, this is all gone. Is that, or am I wrong, still part of your journey? You're taking this, okay, I've been through worse times before. Maybe when I was in Bosnia or in Syria, I was facing tougher periods, and this is one of the many things I have to confront in life, and I feel positive, and we're going to overcome this, and we're going to come back, and this is just I hope a hiccup.
Yeah.
A little bit longer, but
Yeah.
is this how you confront your life?
Well, I'll be more honest than I probably should be, but I would say when it first happened last year, Elon Musk and a handful of tech bros dismantling the world's largest and most important development humanitarian agency in a matter of days, totally unexpectedly, not part of Trump's agenda, not part of any Republican agenda. The U.S. aid budget was crafted with 50% by Democrats, 50% by Republicans. It was a joint enterprise. It's the most shocking thing that I've ever experienced, professionally, but also personally, because this had been until noon on January 20th when we hand over power, we walk out the door, we handing over to the next team. I knew that the Trump administration would shrink USAID's, wouldn't do work on climate because they're climate deniers, certainly women's empowerment or LGBT rights, that there'd be cuts here or there. But Trump had never said this was on his dance card. He was never hostile to USAID. He was sort of quiet on it. There were other parts of the U.S. government that he had set his sights on. So my first reaction to the dismantlement was just like everyone's, was just pure shock. And shock does a lot to the system. Shock and awe, which is the approach that they took, can be immobilizing. And for me, it was having just been in charge of this agency, to suddenly see them dismantling, and all the Republicans who had supported the programs they were dismantling saying nothing. And Democrats saying lots, but having no tools, and then the courts being acquiescent, even though Congress had the power of the purse and had budgeted USAID to do these things. Courts allowing the executive branch, this is maybe inside American separation of powers, but allowing the executive branch to do things that were congressional prerogatives. The whole thing was... So I struggled, and so many, knowing that the Lancet says that 14 million people would die by 2030 because of these cuts, including 4.5 million kids under 5. So there's so much to scramble to deal with. Part of you wants to spend all of your day raising money to fill these gaps, but then you have 15,000 people who are suddenly out of work, who you want to help find jobs. Then you want to rebuild the constituency to recreate foreign assistance. So I think it's only really in the last 4 or 5 months that fighting spirit is pervading, not only pervading and being operationalized in more productive ways across the United States and in other parts of the world. Philanthropy has kicked in ways it wasn't kicking in initially. Universities were very intimidated in the US by the threats and the attacks by Trump. But now what you're seeing is that the antibodies to this kind of destruction are up and out. And you even see Republicans just passed a few months ago and sent the bill to Trump's desk for signature, a $50 billion foreign assistance bill. So even they have returned to their attachments, some of them, that they had before Trump, and are, I can't say they're showing the courage of their convictions. It's more expressive because they know Trump is not going to spend a lot of this money. But the bottom line is there's a regrouping and also an opportunity in the midterm elections in the US for the American people to vote with their, or to speak with their votes, I guess, or vote with their feet, and actually take back the House of Representatives, which in turn will give this agenda of giving and standing with people internationally out of the recognition both that it's compassionate, but also that it's in your short, medium, and long-term interest. It will give a voice and an institutional vehicle to that perspective that has been completely lacking over this last year and a half while Trump has controlled every branch of government. So that in turn kind of wettens people's appetites, gets them mobilized, makes them feel hope is fuel. And now they feel a hope that where last year it was more despondency in a sense that there's no adult in any room that is standing up against this juggernaut. Now people are activated and mobilized, and there does feel like for sure we can align the moons to reinstitute some of what has been lost, maybe mitigate some of the 14 million lives, make that number a lower number, because every one of those lives is a human being, just like any of us. But what will be very hard to reconstitute is the trust that has been shattered by this act of making a promise that you then break flagrantly with spite, not for cost-cutting reasons. There was a way, if you wanted to draw down U.S. aid and end the agency, that would have been terrible, but they could have been done gradually. Instead, it was done in the most brutalizing way and abrupt way possible, where warehouses filled with food that had already been purchased, or contraceptives that were already procured and in those warehouses, or HIV medicines, antiretrovirals that were already there. Those people who ran those warehouses were told that they would be criminally penalized if they provided those commodities to vulnerable people. I mean, what? That's not a cost saving. You've already bought these, have already been purchased. So how you could recreate the trust, recreating foreign assistance, I think we have the playbook for that. We're activated, we're all guns blazing. But getting communities to believe that America's word can be counted on, that is a generational challenge ahead.
With this message of hope, I thank you so much for coming to Italy. 10 Minutes to Inspire. Samantha, you're welcome back anytime. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angelo. Thank you.